Hello everyone, welcome to today's live broadcast, Clinical Controversies in Vitamin D Testing and Treatment. I'm Alice Farago of DiaSorin, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. We are delighted to bring you this education web seminar presented by LabRoots and sponsored by DiaSorin. DiaSorin is a global leader in the field of biotechnologies. For more than 40 years, the company has been developing, producing, and commercializing reagent kits for in vitro diagnostics worldwide. It offers the broadest range of specialty tests available in the immunodiagnostics market and continually invests research and development using its own distinctive expertise in the field of immunodiagnostics to deliver a high level of innovation. For more information, please visit diasorin.com. We have a few important announcements before we begin. This webcast is designed to be interactive, and we encourage you to ask questions during the event. You can submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found by clicking on the green Q&A button in the lower left of the presentation window. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can. You can enlarge the slide window by clicking on the screen icon in the lower right-hand corner of the slide window. If you have any technical problems viewing or hearing this presentation, please click on the support button at the top right of your presentation window or submit your problem through the green Q&A button lower left. This is an educational webinar and thus offers free continuing education credits. After the webinar is over, please click on the CE button located in the bottom left corner of your web page and follow the process of obtaining your credits. I would now like to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Gregory Plotnikoff. Gregory Plotnikoff is a board-certified internist and pediatrician in active clinical practice who has received numerous national and international awards for research and education. He is the lead author of one book, 23 textbook chapters, and more than 50 articles in peer-reviewed medical literature. His 2003 article on vitamin D deficiency and chronic and non-specific musculoskeletal pain is one of the most highly cited articles in the history of Mayo Clinic proceedings. He is a graduate of Carleton College, Harvard University Divinity School, and the University of Minnesota Medical School. I will now turn it over to Dr. Gregory Plotnikoff for his presentation.
Well, hello everyone. I understand we're back online. If you're still here, thank you so very much. And I apologize for technical difficulties. This is most unexpected and everything, but so thank you for your patience. Let's move forward because you all are interested in vitamin D. It's a hot topic. It's something we need to know about. And so let's just do a quick review. The slide you have before you right now is from the Netter series. It's something that every medical student has been taught for the last umpteen number of decades. And that is, you see where sunshine, sunlight, ultravitamin B in a certain range, striking the skin, precipitates a chemical reaction that that then goes to liver for further hydroxylation, for its first hydroxylation, then on to the kidney for second hydroxylation, creating an active product, 1,25-dihydroxy vitamin D, which is not a vitamin at all by normal understanding, vitamins being cofactors. This is a hormone, and this binds to vitamin D receptors found throughout the body, and which will actually regulate gene expression for hundreds or perhaps even more genes in our body. And so a big concern that I want you to know about is that actually what medical students had not been taught for many years is the fact that there are activating enzymes throughout the body, not just the kidney. And so you have all kinds of autocrine and paracrine and endocrine effects of this hormone acting locally and systemically. Vitamin D is very important, and so recent research has introduced new understandings about the vitamin D receptor, about the different enzymes for activation and deactivation of the active form of vitamin D, And there's also been interest in vitamin D binding protein. Today we're going to focus on what is well established and what has been considered the evidence base for vitamin D. But the big point is that vitamin D consciousness has to be part of our reality, whereas in fact we all suffer somewhat from nature deficit disorder. We spend long hours indoors in air conditioning. We're generally, when we do go outside, we have clothing on, we are, have sunscreen on. We live in places like here in Minnesota, halfway to the North Pole. We can only make vitamin D in a very narrow range of the year. Supplementation is really important. Now, this has been well understood. In this famous picture from Life magazine, you see during the era of Lenin in Soviet Russia, and here are children standing around an ultraviolet B emitting light and getting their vitamin D in the midst of winter. And they thought, oh, isn't this an interesting picture, and isn't this reflection of some kind of archaic understanding? No, actually this is a very progressive understanding that yes, if you're living in Siberia in the far north in 24-hour day darkness, you're not going to get vitamin D from anywhere else unless, and that we really need to encourage. So, is it an issue? Well, we think about it maybe in an advanced industrial society like the United Kingdom. Well, actually, yes. You know, there's kind of all kinds of articles coming out about we're seeing more and more rickets, and this is from 2013. And in fact, it's a big concern of the World Health Organization, Institute of Medicine. Other groups have taken on this issue because, in fact, you say, how could this possibly happen? That was something from the time of Dickens and the like. But in fact, in 2010, the Institute of Medicine did report on this, and they say yes, vitamin D is playing a key role in bone health. They say, but the current evidence does not support other benefits for vitamin D. Let's unpack this story and set the context around it. In 2008, the British Medical Journal published a review article of vitamin D, which addressed vitamin D deficiency causes and consequences. The author, Michael Hollick, a professor of medicine at Boston University Medical School, delineated very clearly that the existing literature at that time demonstrating a very strong correlation of low vitamin D states with multiple medical concerns. However, correlations do not represent causality, and so with more and more public interest in this low cost, low toxicity, possibly very helpful intervention, the Institute of Medicine, the National Academy of Sciences in the United States pulled together a blue ribbon committee to really address this. And that's when they said, yes, the evidence does demonstrate that vitamin D is crucial for bone health, but they said all the other correlations that have been well documented, the evidence was not strong enough. That is, they were not double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled clinical trials or meta-analyses of clinical trials demonstrating both safety and efficacy of supplementation. Now, with this, the Institute of Medicine said that, well, actually we're going to redefine what is kind of the normal level down to 20 nanograms per ml by blood measurement. And we're going to say that North Americans in general, with few exceptions, have sufficient vitamin D, and we are going to triple the recommendation for intake from 200 international units to 600 international units per day. Now, I should note that the World Health Organization's recommendation remains at 200 international units per day, no matter where you live, whether you live at the North Pole or whether you live in the equatorial tropics, whether you're 600 pounds or 6 pounds is kind of like pretty much the same. Whether you're black or white, doesn't necessarily really reflect good science. So But that is where we are today. Going to the next slide here. In 2011, following the 2010 report, the world's foremost organization, scientifically based organization on endocrine-related issues, Endocrine Society, said they'd really like to see people greater than or equal to 30 nanograms per ml. So all of a sudden you have a controversy right there. Is it 20? Is it 30? How do you decide? Well, part of the concern is that actually there was a big question about, well, looking at the data. The Institute of Medicine put a lot of weight on this one study, looking at 675 cadavers, people who died in accidents in Germany throughout the year. They did a measure of their blood level of vitamin D at the time of death and their bone mineral density, a kind of assessment of bone strength. And you can see on the x-axis that the blood levels of vitamin D ranged quite a bit. I should note that it says nanomoles per liter, so that's 2.5 times higher than nanograms per ml. So the Institute of Medicine recommended the cutoff being 20 nanograms or per ml or 50 nanomoles per liter, as you see that on the line here. What was of great interest was actually these right here, and that is people with kind of seen as having weak bones and good vitamin D levels. And so the Institute of Medicine said 20, but many other people said no, it should have been right here at 30 to ensure that everyone has a good bone mineral density. Now, of course, there's a big difference because vitamin D levels can vary throughout the year, and bone mineral density does not vary throughout the year. So you have a stock and flow challenge. So in case people were saying the numbers aren't really all that compellingly strong. And so now we're in this kind of place where a lot of different agendas are coming out. The public health agenda is what amount do we need to give people to ensure that 97.5% of the population avoids an index disease such as rickets, and I think we should consider osteoporosis another key issue. Clinical trialists say don't supplement because we need to establish causality and we don't want any confounding issues there. Clinical trialists are telling clinicians, don't supplement because it's literally, to quote some publishing an editorial in JAMA, threatens our capacity to do randomized controlled trials in normal populations. And clinicians are saying, I've got Mrs. Jones in front of me, she's suffering, I need to measure and supplement her vitamin D, no matter what the clinical trialists say. It's low cost, it's low toxicity, if it has a big bang for the buck, great, and we'll know within a month. And then clinicians in the public, clinicians are still saying, wait for the randomized controlled trials. The public is saying, hey, wait a second, I've got a huge deductible for my health insurance. Are you telling me I cannot make the bet that if I put 5 cents a day into vitamin D, I might save myself a lot of money? So lots of competing issues here, lots of competing agendas, lots of concerns, and we're going to see these play out in the media in a variety of ways, and we also see it playing out in funding agendas as well. So competing priorities, we cover these. I'm just going to jump ahead, but I want to report that in 2012, the Surgeon General said, hey, wait a second, osteoporosis is a major threat to Americans, and it's preventable. And how do we prevent it? Make sure you get enough vitamin D. Well, what is enough? Is it Is it the World Health Organization's 200 international units a day? Is it the Institute of Medicine's recommendation for 600 international units a day? Is it 6,000 international units a day? It's a very good question. We can only know by measurement. I can tell you as a clinician, there really is no really good physical exam for any kind of blood test that would replace a blood test. You cannot look at someone and say, I bet your cholesterol level is 220. Same thing as you can't say, I bet your vitamin D level is 26. Can't say it. It just does not exist. Measurement's the only way to address that. And so in 2015, this is a very powerful editorial in the Journal of the American Medical Association. They're pleading, don't measure, don't supplement, because it threatens our capacity to conduct randomized controlled trials in usual risk populations. Well, wait a second. Whose agenda is at play here? And so looking at this, let me introduce you to a case. Very powerful case. Why we should be spending more time looking at vitamin D. 48-year-old, he's a physician, he's got diabetes, he's got hypertension, risk factors for cardiac disease, but he's not doing well. He's got palpitations, he's pre-syncopal, he's about to pass out, increasing shortness of breath. He comes in for exam, he's in florid heart failure. Not a good place to be, and not expected with someone his age with no previous concerns. And so you see it in a chest x-ray, really clear, no question, this is heart failure. We take a look at what's going on with his EKG. You can tell, even if you're not a clinician, you know this is not normal. The heart is all over the place, it's beating way too fast to be able to keep blood pressure up. This is a very abnormal situation, an emergency situation, not well explained. The most likely cause is going to be, this is going to be severe heart failure, and it's probably due to the heart not getting enough oxygen. So, of course, you rush this patient into the angiographic suite. You take a look at the heart vessels, you plan to stent or bypass, but everything comes back normal. Huh? What's going on? Well, let's get back to the room and let's think about this. So he's back in the room. He needs to go on ventilatory support. He's having lots of episodes of VTAC. RV medication is being tried. You have to kind of charge him up again, and multiple times. That's not solving the problem. He actually, people say, well, what's going on? Well, let's take a look at some blood tests, and common blood tests being done for different steroids and different things in unusual situations, and lo and behold, his calcium is very low. And lo and behold, his parathyroid hormone is very high. Huh. And his vitamin D is really low. Well, we can't do anything else. That's the only abnormal thing we found. So let's at least treat his vitamin D. I should back up and say, most places in the United States, North America, would say, hey, this guy needs a heart transplant, get him on the list right away. We can't do anything else. We can't pace him out of this. We can't do anything. Heart transplant. But this was India, and there were no heart transplants available in this region. So what are you going to do? Well, how about some vitamin D and calcium? At least do that. Well, what happened? Steady improvement in his vital signs, sinus rhythm, no need to cardiovert, and heart size returns to normal, lungs clear, and this is all confirmed by MRI of his heart. So, isn't this an interesting situation? This is where the clinician issue comes in. They say, hey, look, it's low cost, low toxicity. You know, we spent maybe $10 in vitamin D and calcium versus $250,000 to $500,000 for a heart transplant. How do we weigh this? Let's do this. Even if there isn't randomized controlled trial data supporting this. So this was published in Annals of Internal Medicine, one of the leading medical journals of the world. And so this is, people say, well, why should we be doing this in the absence of double-blind randomized controlled trials? And the public is asking about this too. So for example, if you've got a high deductible plan, and let's say you've got a potentially expensive situation coming up, like your birth of a child. We know that one day in a newborn intensive care unit can be easily $4,500. People say, well, what can I do to minimize the risk of this? Because I don't want to spend my deductible on this. So if we look at vitamin D and prenatal health, we know that there are strong correlations with impaired insulin sensitivity, gestational diabetes, a major risk factor, bacterial vaginosis, a risk factor, periodontal disease, a risk factor, preeclampsia, something we definitely want to avoid, emergent C-section, definitely want to avoid, but in vitro fertilization failure and maternal depression, all correlated with vitamin D status. And for the newborn, low maternal vitamin D is correlated with small for gestational age, correlated with birth weight and birth length and head circumference and calcium levels and immune function, all strongly correlated with vitamin D status. And for the child themselves, strong correlations with bone mineral content, cavities, infections, including RSV bronchiolitis, common cause of admission to the hospital in winter season, allergies, wheezing, atopic dermatitis, eating disorders in children, obesity, and neuropsychological development. Yeah, child IQ, linked. So 5 cents a day for vitamin D, or should we wait for the randomized controlled trials? And that's where we get all kinds of concerns. Now, if you think about IQ in your children, it's just kind of like, well, where is this being published? It's being published in things like Pediatrics, leading journals of the world, Pediatrics. These are kind of, this is not kind of like, kind of out on too much edge. These are kind of rigorous places to get published. It's the most competitive journal in the world in pediatrics is to publish in the Journal of Pediatrics, of the American Academy of Pediatrics. So there's good reason to consider that at least there's a link, even if we can't prove causality at this time. So, but where do things go? When the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology said, hey, look, at this time, if there's insufficient evidence, meaning randomized controlled trial, double-blinded, and meta-analyses of this to support a recommendation for screening for all pregnant women. Okay, well, that's reasonable. But additionally, recommendations concerning routine supplementation, let's wait until we get more data published. And so a very conservative approach. And so you get the public clamoring for normal vitamin D levels, and you get the medical profession saying, let's wait for the data to prove that this is good, effective, and safe. So two different types of advocacy going on. So where do we fall on this? Well, it's a value judgment, of course. And so I need to share with you, though, 5 facts today that are important for you to share with all your friends and neighbors and colleagues. Number 1 is vitamin D is not a vitamin, it is a hormone. And it affects gene expression for hundreds, if not thousands, of genes. The vitamin D receptor is found throughout the body. That includes every brain cell, heart cell, liver cell, lung cell, immune cell, bone marrow cell, muscle cell. The vitamin D receptor is there for a reason. Number 3 is actually we often don't get enough of vitamin D in diet, or we're not making enough because we just don't have exposure to the sun anymore. And then likewise, for those of you doing research or evaluating research, we have to say, look, unrecognized deficiency, unacknowledged, not addressed, confounds both medical care and medical research. And there are certain things, in my opinion, need to be ruled out, such as vitamin D deficiency, before certain diagnoses can be made. So, what are the additional controversies? Well, there are many. So controversy number one is, what is normal? What's a normal level? And who is normal? And these are obviously very profoundly political questions. And so the normal range, though, is based upon what's considered a kind of a reference population. If we look at two different types of reference populations, say office workers like myself, or like lifeguards, farmers, and the like, you get two really different levels of what considers normal. So an office worker like myself, compared to lifeguards, lifeguards about 2.5 times higher levels of vitamin D. But which population is, quote, normal? Well, I'm an office worker, I'm normal, so therefore that must be the reference population. But that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. It isn't necessarily normal for the human being to be living in a cave all day long. And so if we look at vitamin D levels in outdoor workers, here we have the Institute of Medicine's recommendation for 20. Here we have the Endocrine Society's recommendation for 30, but where are we seeing things come through? Well, Puerto Rican farmers, mean levels, somewhere low 50s. Lifeguards in St. Louis, Missouri, levels around 64. Israeli lifeguards, levels around 60. Is that really normal? So in fact, actually, this is really questions our IOM's recommendation of what is normal. Controversy number two, that is this whole idea about the index disease, the recommended daily allowance. It's supposed to be an amount that you take in to prevent an index disease, and therefore that is good for the entire person. Index disease for vitamin D has been rickets. Now, obviously, we want to prevent rickets, but is there a vitamin D connection with anything else? Index diseases tend to have short latency. What about long-term issues? So, you think about classic things of deficiency: beriberi, pellagra, scurvy, things we never hear about anymore, and rickets. But what if there's something more than just rickets that for vitamin D being important? And so long latency diseases, say like cancer, hypertension, diabetes, we're not considering them. And what about if there is more than just bone involvement? What if that vitamin D receptor in other tissues is playing a role in some regard? And what if we say that, we too easily write off diagnoses to a non-vitamin D related cause, when in fact actually it could be vitamin D, say like fibromyalgia or falls or osteopenia, etc. So controversy number three, and that is the recommendation of 400 international units per day, which you find in North America as what the general amount you find in a multivitamin. Where does that number come from, the 400 international units? Well, I have to tell you, it comes from one article published in 1940 in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And it actually wasn't an article on vitamin D, it was an article on rickets. And 2 paragraphs in that lengthy article addressed vitamin D. And they say, wow, look at these white kids in Boston who don't have rickets. Why is it? Oh, they're doing cod liver oil. Oh, how much? A tablespoon a day. Okay, how much vitamin D in that tablespoon? Oh, about 400 international units. Okay, that's our recommendation. Yes, that's it for the science. It was repeated in a 1963 pediatrics article and pretty much taken as gospel truth ever since. How strong is the science behind this? Controversy number 4 you need to know about. Oh, if I just go out 15 minutes a day, that will be enough. Well, that may be true if you're in the summer and you're between the hours of 10 and 3 and you're not wearing sunscreen and you happen to be white and thin and young. And so actually, in the southern United States, that's kind of a guarantee. But, it's kind of further north you go, is that really going to be the case? No, actually it's not at all. And so, in fact, if we look at here in Minneapolis at 45 degrees north, halfway to the North Pole, you can see that actually there is a really kind of a nice bell curve throughout the year for ultraviolet. Well, you can see also why, it's kind of mid-April to kind of like early to mid-September is about the only time you can really make vitamin D by being out in the sun here in Minnesota. But what's surprising is that, look at this, even in the middle of the kind of high season of making vitamin D, the actual kind of vitamin D producing rays reaching the ground can vary quite a bit depending upon smog, depending upon overhead and clouds and the like. And so if you've ever flown into an airport on a sunny day, you see kind of this brown haze across the horizon. Consider that brown haze, that smog, to be a vitamin D umbrella. It may seem to be sunny on the ground, but you may not be getting the rays to make the vitamin D. Add on top of that clothing and sunscreen, and you're really not going to be making vitamin D. And so it's a big concern. And last concern was that the committee emphasizes that, this is the Institute of Medicine, with a few exceptions, all North Americans are receiving enough vitamin D. So the question are, well, who are the exceptions? So the exceptions are, surprisingly, number 1, immigrants and refugees. And in fact, if we look at one study I was involved in, looking at nearly 1,400 new here to Minnesota, more than half were deficient. A good percentage were severely deficient, and it's all had to do with origin. And that is almost all the Ethiopians, people from East Africa, they were coming here with dark skin. The more color in one's skin, the more sun one needs to make the same amount of vitamin D as someone with less color in their skin. And so, profound difference between white Russians and black Ethiopians. And profound difference is that actually a lot of these folks who were actually quite young, and that was also a surprise, and more so than the elderly. Why is that? I guess we're all inside on screens a lot of the day. So, in fact, actually, common things saying 15 minutes a day, well, actually it's going to vary a lot depending on the color of your skin and where you live and how much time you can actually get outside. So going to the next slide here, clicking ahead, waiting for a response, excuse me. Okay, so let's take a look at Centers for Disease Control data. What we're looking at is National Health and Nutrition Evaluation Surveys from 2 different years, or 2 different trials. And what you see is the most recent trial across the board by ages, by genders, and by ethnicities, that across the board vitamin D levels appear to have dropped significantly. Now there may be some issues around technical testing, But let's take a look at other issues. Let's look at profoundly low vitamin D levels, less than 10 nanograms per ml. It's gone up across the board in all age groups. It's gone up significantly between men and women. And there's a profound variance among different groups. In fact, people with dark skin, in this case blacks, nearly 30% have profoundly low vitamin D levels, according to the Centers for Disease Control. So, question is, most Americans, with few exceptions, have levels greater than 20. Well, who are those exceptions? Well, we identified refugees and we identified ethnic minorities. What's going on here? And if we look at levels better than what we want to see according to the Endocrine Society, again, across the board by ages and by genders and by ethnicities, it has dropped. So we have more people who are profoundly deficient, and we have less people who are sufficient across the board. Are you one of them? Do you know anyone among them? I have to say this is true for all North Americans. This is a big concern. And if you consider that 45 degrees north is the equivalent of southern France, the French-Spanish border, I have to say a huge percent of Europe would be at risk as well based on just sun exposure data. So looking at this issue more specifically at 45 degrees north here in Minnesota, in the spring of 2010, we looked at 10,646 employees of a healthcare system, predominantly female, predominantly nurses. Everyone had great access to healthcare and presumably more knowledgeable than the lay public, and everyone had health insurance and ready access to care. What kind of data did we see looking at vitamin D levels in them? Well, of this group, it's kind of, we should also say that the local paper had run many articles on vitamin D deficiency prior to the testing. And so you think that everyone should be doing well. We tested them all in the spring in a very narrow time period, and here are the results. 10,646. We found 643, about 6% of the population had levels less than 10, were profoundly low. We found that another 30% had levels less than the Institute of Medicine's recommendation. You say, well, wait a second. The few exceptions, how could this be? And even if we look at going further to get levels greater than 20, still, it's kind of a huge percent had levels less than 30. How could this be? This is probably the least risk-oriented group. That is, we think about maybe people who are disconnected from the medical system, don't have health insurance, don't have a good understanding of health and well-being and physiology. How could this be? So in fact, this is part of the reason why webinars like this are so important, and why it's so important for you to share this with your neighbors and just kind of, wait a second, this is a big issue in our country. If it's true for health professionals, how many other people can be true for? So going to the next slide here, we took a look then specifically at women of childbearing age. And this is about 6,500 women, and we took a look at what they were reporting for intake of vitamin D. And here you see kind of on the x-axis you've got intake report, the y-axis is measured level, and these are mean levels. And lo and behold, across the board, everyone has a mean level greater than the Institute of Medicine's recommendation. Yay! Okay, so that's good for a mean level, but what percent actually achieved greater than 20 nanograms per ml by levels? So if we take a look at a good recommendation, like Institute of Medicine's report, people were taking a prenatal vitamin, taking a or a multivitamin. Lo and behold, it's only a small fraction of people who actually meet that level. So what's true looking at population as a whole is not true for individuals. I might say, on average, for most people, a multivitamin day may be sufficient for ensuring a bare minimum vitamin D level of 20 nanograms per ml, but in fact, in practice, that is not the case. And notice that this is also for people with a BMI less than 30. For people with BMIs greater than 30, which is a large percent of our population, these numbers go up significantly more. And that is, the bigger our BMI, the higher the dose we need to ensure the same blood level as someone with a smaller BMI. So, facts to share. Number one is female healthcare workers of childbearing age have a high incidence of low vitamin D. And taking a prenatal vitamin or multivitamin doesn't ensure adequate levels. And a BMI greater than 30 is an increased risk factor for low vitamin D. Prenatal vitamin may not be enough. Well, how can you know that? Well, and that's the point, is that we need to measure. And so that would be the argument for making a measurement, because you can't know where someone is going to be. You can underdose, you can overdose. The only guide is to actually measure. So bone health is the one thing we can hang our levels on, and we can say that the clinical data actually suggests that bone mineral density is found at levels much greater than 20, and this is based on a variety of reports going back many years. And for example, if we take a look at a dozen studies with 40,000 participants, a level of 20 nanograms is not enough to prevent either fractures or falls, but higher levels do. And again, being published in some of the leading medical journals of the world, but there may be confounders. They may have studied calcium at the same time. They may not have been measuring actual cutoff thresholds. All we can say is that you need levels greater than 20, it appears, based on these 12 studies with 40,000 participants. So, other interesting facts. Calcium absorption appears to be optimized at levels greater than 32. And simply increasing a vitamin D level from 20 to 32 improves calcium absorption by 65%. Wow. So recommendations for calcium intake have to be based also upon what vitamin D level one has. If one is running low, you're going to need a significantly higher intake than someone running high. They're going to need much less of an intake. Parathyroid hormone. If we plot vitamin D levels versus parathyroid hormone, we know that there is an inflection point greater than 20, and it's minimized at levels greater at 40. We can say that based on the study of the 10,646 health care employees, that people reported really high level of intake weren't running really significantly high levels to begin with. At significantly high levels, and that the body has the capacity to create a homeostatic balance depending on where it needs to be. So where does that leave us right now? Well, there's a lot of challenges that we need to think about in getting good research moving forward. Is there a difference between dose and serum level? Yeah, one size fits all doesn't fit for large and small, northern and southern, black and white, kind of big and thin. One size doesn't fit all. We need to focus on serum levels. Second thing is, one thing is to replenish, it's a whole other thing to maintain. And there's a big difference between a vitamin D2, a prescription strength with a very short half-life, and a vitamin D3, the over-the-counter form, with a half-life of 3 weeks or more, much like what one would get by going out to the beach, and you get a half-life about 3 weeks or so for that vitamin D produced. Additionally, there's a whole issue about activated vitamin D called calcitriol, the 125 dihydroxy vitamin D. People suggest maybe we should just be giving that to everyone and bypass the body's natural capacities to make vitamin D as it sees fit and where it sees fit. It's an interesting question. Again, full value judgments behind that. And then there are kind of different confounders. For example, that there are certain medications which reduce vitamin D levels, like dexamethasone or St. John's wort, the herb, rifampin, and a variety of things. Certainly smoking, obesity, intake, sun exposure, these are all potential confounders for things. And then we have the question about the polymorphisms and vitamin D receptor and activating and deactivating enzymes and the vitamin D binding protein. This is where good research in the future is going to be going to help us better understand these natural variations. I can say that based on my work in genomics that there are great variability in vitamin D receptor binding status, and there are at least 4 key polymorphisms which appear to have correlations with health effects. In the interpretation, my part is that for people with vitamin D receptor polymorphisms, hypothesis that needs to be tested is, do these people do better with even higher levels than other people? There's a biological plausibility behind that hypothesis, and we're awaiting data on that. So, to kind of conclude about what we need people to know, the population, is that vitamin D is not a vitamin, it's a hormone. It regulates many genes in our body, and the vitamin D receptors on many key organs, including the brain, both the cognitive and emotional parts of the brain, the immune system, our muscles, our bone marrow, every organ you can think of, and that as mostly inside living people in North America and in Europe, we just aren't getting the sun exposure to make vitamin D. Most of us live too far north for most of the year to make vitamin D. Even if we're outside on a sunny day at high noon, stark naked in the public square, we still might not make a drop of vitamin D. Diet and common vitamins are not likely to be enough. In North America, you can get vitamin D fortified milk, but you have to be drinking kind of like a gallon or 2 gallons a day, day after day, and I don't recommend that for anyone. And that there's a lot of, fifth point is that there's a lot of unrecognized deficiency out there, and that confounds our medical care and medical research. And so we can have false positive, false negative studies. We need to be paying more attention to this as an important factor in outcomes. And so take-home points today is kind of like, hey, there's a blood test that's available. The 25-hydroxy vitamin D blood test is easily done in clinic. It doesn't require fasting, and it gives us a number. We want to have numbers greater than 32, I believe, with PTH less than 50. And this is different from the Institute of Medicine's recommendation of greater than 20, but it's incorporating other thoughts. And this, of course, is going to be revised in years to come, but that's a general guideline. The way to do this is through supplementation for most people. Supplement, and monitor. And recognize that medications like prednisone and other steroids, different anti-seizure medications and the like can simulate lower levels. And key point is that this 15-minute in the sun rule doesn't make any sense because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And the greater the BMI, the more sun exposure we need, the more color in our skin, the more sun exposure we need, the more tobacco smoke exposure, the more sunscreen we use, the more clothing we wear, the more hours we spend indoors, the more sun exposure we need to make vitamin D. And so, key point is, you go see your doctor, there's no physical exam for vitamin D. You can only really understand it by a blood level and measurement to understand supplementation. So at this point, I think that I want to thank you, everyone, for your participation and for your listening in this. I hope I've been helpful, and I want to address some of your questions. I appreciate your hanging out longer than we've gone, and so we're going to ask you to kind of type in your questions here. And the first question we have is, why don't we just supplement and bypass measurement altogether? So thank you for that question. And yes, we can. So let's say, how much should we supplement? So if I go back to clinic this afternoon and saw everyone take 5,000 international units a day, would that be good? And perhaps, but we're certainly going to be over supplementing some people, and that wouldn't make sense. And for others, we could still be under supplementing. In my experience, people can have more than 10,000 international units a day requirements to kind of replenish. You know, think about the bigger the BMI and the less exposure, sun exposure one has, or confounding medications or other things. The bottom line is there is no one-size-fits-all, as much as we would like that simplicity, and that's why, from a clinical perspective, measurement is so important. A second question is there a way to get one's doctor to order this test? So, well, a lot of doctors say, that's very nice, Mrs. Jones, just go ahead and take a multivitamin, or as one doctor said recently here in town, just eat more broccoli. Well, key point here is actually there's no vitamin D in broccoli, and there's minimal vitamin D even in good healthy foods like salmon or eggs. And fortified milk, you have to think about 400 international units per quart, or about 1,600 international units per gallon, and some people do require 5,000 international units a day. So what's that, 3 gallons a day, day after day after day? I don't think so. And so a big point here is actually, since there is not a one-size-fits-all, it's really only through measurement that you can really know where people are to begin with. Some people are just fine on their multivitamin day or their diet or their sun exposure, and those people don't need to be supplemented at all. Other people are profoundly low, and so to really understand where people are, it's a key issue. A third question that people had is, are you sure there's no physical exam for low vitamin D? And I say, well, yes, let's clarify that a little bit. People with profoundly low levels will be essentially in wheelchairs, they'll be weak, and they will be, and so a quick test is to have people place hands across their arms on their shoulders and actually have them stand up and down 5 times really quickly. Those people who can't do it really quickly are those people who have to put their arms down and push themselves up. That's low vitamin D until proven otherwise. And there have been a number of young people who have had their lives severely impacted by being told that they're whiners or complainers because they are weak and achy, and no one considered low vitamin D. Most poignant case I'll wrap up with here is a young woman I saw. She came to my clinic. She had had 5 years of progressive musculoskeletal pain and weakness. She saw numerous doctors. They wanted to offer, they thought it was fibromyalgia, depression. It was kind of like, oh, she's a whiner. But no, this is someone who loved going to the gym. And so from age 30 to 35, she's getting progressively weaker. Literally, she became so weak that she could barely stand up at the kitchen counter to do the dishes, and her 2 children were taken away from her. She came to see me and went out to greet her in the waiting room, and she pushes her hands onto your oh, hi, nice to meet you. I'm just kind of like, oh my God, 35-year-old African-American woman, progressive weakness. This is vitamin D deficiency until proven otherwise. Her vitamin D levels came back profoundly low. We got her on vitamin D and calcium, and literally, it's just kind of, how much do we spend on vitamin D? I don't know, $20, $30 on vitamin D, and she gets her 2 children back. Now, there are not going to be any randomized control trials on that, but from a clinical perspective, I would say, oh, we need to consider this in our differential diagnosis for every mystery illness and for everything that may be anyone with a severe illness. It's so easy to check a vitamin D. It's so easy to replenish it. You see results fairly quickly. Either it works or it doesn't. Why wait 10, 15 years to randomized control trials? Right? So that's my opinion. I said we should be doing more measurement, more supplementation. Obviously, there are other people who think otherwise, but that's what the data is for, and I'm glad that we're all connecting the data. And I see no other questions right now. We've gone over. Thank you for your patience today. Thank you very much. I'm wishing all of you the very best of health, and I'll look forward to any questions that you want to send afterwards. Thank you. Take care.